Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot daf tzadihei. We're going to start at the bottom. We were talking about a man who ends up with sleeping with his wife's sister. And what we said is he's not forbidden to go back to his original wife after he does this. So the Gemara is going to say, why don't we forbid him to go back to his original wife? It doesn't make sense, right? Why don't we disqualify him from going back, just like a woman who sleeps with, right, thinks her husband's dead, goes back, accidentally sleeps with him, and the same thing with this husband who thinks his wife, right, she went off, he thinks she's dead, then he sleeps with her sister. Why don't we say the exact same thing? So the Gemara says, Lo dam. Ishto de b'mezid asira midoraita b'shogeg gazru barabanat. If he does it intentionally, then, right, if a woman who's an issur sleeps with a man intentionally, she's not allowed to go back to her original husband on a Torah level. Right? That they learn out from the Sota. So b'shogeg gazru barabanat. So when it comes to an unwitting, right, that was on purpose. So on purpose, she can on a Torah level. So the rabbis forbade her on a rabbinic level in the case where she's unwitting about it, right? Shogeg. But a chot isha, but a chot isha is not forbidden by Torah law. B'shogeg lo gazru barabanan. They didn't make a gzera in a shogeg case. Now we want to know binala de lo asira. How do we know that if he does it on purpose and decides intentionally to sleep with a woman's sister, he's not forbidden to go back to his original wife? Detanya ota. Okay, this is where it says, V'shachav ish ota shechvat zera. This is in the Sota. Those abroad, it's this week's parsha. Those who are in Israel, it was already this past week. V'shachav ish ota shechvat zera v'ne'alam me'inei isha v'nistera v'hi nitma'a v'eid ein ba v'hi lo nitpasa. Right, so he sleeps with her, and then, right, she becomes tamei, and there's no aid, v'hi lo nitpasa. Okay, so now from there they learn, Shachav ish ota, just her. She's the one who's lo nitpasa, which they say means she can't go back to her husband. Ota shchivata usarta ve'en shchivat achota usarta. Not any other thing, not any other rule. Now the Gemara is going to say, well, the truth is, if it weren't for this drasha, we would have thought it was the same law. Why? So they say, she'achov alo dinu, you could have said it was a logical argument. Logic would have stated it would be forbidden. Why? And that's why you need the pasuk to tell you it's not. If it's a light issur, which we're going to see as issur, I don't know why they think that's light. We're going to have to figure that out later. We're actually going to have 5 interpretations of how to read this. If an issur kal ne'esal ha'osel, meaning the one who forbade her is now going to be forbidden, right? He can't, right? He forbade her to other people by marrying her, right? She becomes forbidden to everyone else. Now, right, she's going to be, because she was an issur, she's now forbidden to go back to him. Makom shabal issur chamor, if it's a more stringent, like chotisha, like a sister of your wife, eino din shene'asar ha'osel, wouldn't we say that the one who forbade him to the sister, the wife, right? The original wife, shouldn't he be forbidden to the original wife? So that's the logic. Because of that, we end up with a pasuk that proves it not to be the case. If you remember, in the previous class, we talked about chamoto and that issue of the mother-in-law. So now we're going to talk about the mother-in-law and the difference between the sister and the mother-in-law. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, lo nechleku beit Shammai, this is a braita. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, lo nechleku beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, bebal chamoto sheposelet ishto. If somebody sleeps with his mother-in-law, he's forbidden to go back to his wife. Everybody agrees about that, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Alma nechleku, when do Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel have a machloket? Bebal achot ishto. If you sleep with your wife's sister, then they have a machloket. Beit Shammai omrim posel. What we said is not true. What we don't do, we don't forbid him, but according to Beit Shammai, we do. Beit Hillel omrim lo posel. Beit Hillel says, no, we don't disqualify you from, right? You can go back and stay married to her. That's what we hold by. But Amar Rabbi Yosi, he has a different way of reading it. He says, lo nechleku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel b'ba'al achot isho shelo poselet ishto. He has a much more minimalist approach. We're going to disqualify much fewer, according to him. Everyone agrees that achot ishto, the wife's not, he can go back to his wife, no problem, if he sleeps with their sister. Alma nechleku b'ba'al chamoto. The machloket is specifically about ba'al chamoto. If he sleeps with the mother-in-law, Beit Shammai omrim posel, Beit Hillel omrim lo posel. So according to Rabbi Yosi, according to Beit Hillel, we actually don't disqualify any of them from going back. Only an issur, for example, right? Someone, again, that's a classic. Someone who sleeps with someone else's husband, right? Right. So, I'm sorry, a woman who has an adulterous relationship is always forbidden to go back to her original husband, right? And likewise, the rabbis penalized her in the case where she thought he was dead. But in these other cases, according to Beit Hillel, for sure, we're not going to penalize. It's just a matter, where does Beit Shammai say we do? Lefi, now he's going to explain why is it not disqualify the wife in the Chamoto case. Okay, we're now going all the way back. Before they were ever married, she was permitted to anybody and he was permitted to anyone. Free world out there. They can marry whoever they want. Kiddusha, as soon as Kiddushin took place, all of a sudden, everybody became a little bit forbidden, or a lot forbidden. He forbids her by doing the Kiddushin, and she forbids him. What he forbade her is much greater, though, than what she forbade him. He forbade her to everybody in the world. That's what Birkat HaErusin is. You're basically forbidden to everybody. Only with marriage will you be permitted specifically to your husband. But she only forbade him to her relatives, her mother, for example, her sister, the people we're discussing. So now here comes the explanation. It's logical to say the following. Now he forbade her to everybody in the world. And yet, if she accidentally married someone, she ended up in a relationship with one of these men while she was married to him, okay, if she was shigiga, okay, this means if, for example, one second, right, what this is, on a Torah level, if she accidentally thought her husband was dead and went and married someone, she'd actually be permitted to her husband on a Torah level. Now, the rabbis came and forbade her and penalized her, but theoretically, she's only forbidden to her husband when she does it intentionally. So he shelo asarta ela bikrovotea. So now, she who forbade him only to her relatives, and if shagag ba'asurlo, if he accidentally married the sister thinking it was permitted to him, eino din shalone asarbo mutarlo, right? All the more so should he not be forbidden to the one who was originally permitted to him, right? The wife itself, he shouldn't be forbidden. Because if she herself, if she did it accidentally, she wouldn't be forbidden, then all the more so he who has much less isurim upon him should be permitted to the one who forbade him, which is his wife. This would explain shogeg, right? That only explains cases where it was all accidental, like they went abroad and thought they were dead. But where do we get if it was intentional? Talmud Lomar, ota. For that, we have the pasuk to teach you. So you did it intentionally. You're also not penalized, and that's a drasha from the pasuk. That explains Rabbi Yosi. What about Rabbi Yehuda? So Rabbi Yami says in the name of Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning is the following. He thinks, right, that when it comes to a chamoto, everyone agrees that it's forbidden. If he sleeps with the mother, then he can't go back to his wife. Which we darshaned already yesterday, right? Why both of them? The first wife shouldn't have to be penalized. She didn't do anything wrong, right? It's just the fact that he slept with her mother doesn't make her punished. She shouldn't get a punishment of streifa. So they say, since it clearly has nothing to do with streifa, it must be to say she is forbidden to him. Rabbi Yosi, Amar Shmuel, and Alachah ke Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. She's not forbidden to, right? He can go back to his original wife. Who de avid issur b'chamate? There was someone who slept with his mother-in-law. Atie Rabbi Yehuda nagde. He gave him lashes, and as he was giving him lashes, he says to him, Amarle, ilav Amar Shmuel, and Alachah ke Rabbi Yehuda. If it wasn't for the fact that Shmuel paskin that we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, asarita ala isura da'alam. I would forbid you to her forever. Okay, in other words, I think you should really be forbidden to go back to your wife as punishment. But what am I going to do? Because Shmuel paskined against what I think. My issur kal. Now we have to determine what is this issur kal, and we're going to have 5 options of understanding it. So remember, we said before, if it was issur kal and ne'asar ha'oser, the person who originally forbade them from marrying, meaning a regular issur kal would be an eshedish, let's say. Let's start with that. The husband who forbade the wife, issur kal, he forbade her to marry, right, to be with any other man. And yet, right, in that case, ne'esar ha'osel, she can't go back to her original husband. So makom shabal issur chamor eino din shene'esar ha'osel. Wouldn't we also forbid it in a case of like kabbalah choto, where the wife forbade the husband from marrying her sister because her existence means her sister is now forbidden to him? Shouldn't he be forbidden to go back to her? So what's this issur kal? Amra Prista machzir grushato misheniset. Now this is going to get a little bit complicated, but imagine Reuven is married to Yael, and then Yael gets divorced from Reuven. She goes and marries David. David now divorces her as well. So Yael now goes back and marries Reuven. Now that's forbidden. That's called machzir grushato. He's not allowed to return his wife that he divorced if she married someone in the interim. And then let's say he divorces her and she goes back to David. Now, David, that relationship again is a machzir grushato because she was with someone else after the divorce. She went back to Reuven. So that's what we're going to deal with right now. Machzir grushato misheniset, once she was married already. Ba'aleha hai, asra alei. When Reuven marries her, right? When she goes after the divorce from Reuven to David, David forbids her to him. Ba'aleha idach, when Reuven then has a relationship with her after that, even though they were forbidden to, asra alei dahai. He forbids her to go back to David. So now, why is machzir grushato lenient? It's lenient because it's only an issur lav. You're not allowed to do this, but there's no karet involved. And what do you see here? She ends up being forbidden to go back to the original one. Okay, so but then they say this isn't a good proof because we're trying to find someone who forbids, right? Who some encounter forbids her to someone else that she was permitted to in the first place. First of all, she herself was defiled here, as opposed, right? She was involved in the sin, as opposed to the one who the husband slept with her sister. She did nothing wrong. Secondly, isura berov. This would happen to anybody she married, whereas here it's only the sister that's the issue. And right, the sister's only forbidden to her husband, like it's a very unique thing. And isura issur olam, and it's forbidden forever. Whereas achot isha, right, the achot isha is only she can never go back to this husband who divorced her. Whereas the sister, if the event that, let's say I'm the wife, I died, he can marry my sister down the road once I'm dead. Ella Amarish, like she's not forbidden to him forever. So therefore, you can't compare and say that's more strict. That has some leniencies. Ella Amarish Lakish, second attempt. Yevamot. Yevamot laman. Okay, so what's the issue of Yevamot? We're going to have two options. Ilem ala achel. Does it mean a Yevamot who marries somebody else instead of the Yabam, and then she'll be forbidden to marry the Yabam? Kid Rav Hamnuna. Now, not everybody agrees with this, but Rav Hamnuna, we saw this. Rav Hamnuna, Amar Rav Hamnuna. Shomeret Yabam shezinta asura Yevamot. If she was with somebody else, she can't go back to the Yavam. But Mali Yevamot shekenit ma'aguf. First of all, she did something wrong. Isura berov. She's forbidden to everybody in the world other than the Yabam. So can't be that. Ela Yevamot la'achim. Maybe it means the Yevamot to the brothers. Okay, what does this mean? We'll pull up the presentation. Now, if we have Yael is married to Reuven and there's two brothers, Shimon and Levi. So now what happens? Reuven dies and she falls Yibum to the brothers, Shimon and Levi. Ave ba ma'amar. If Shimon does ma'amar with Yael, what happens when he does ma'amar? Now remember, ma'amar only has validity to Rabbanit. So we're going to have something where ma'amar forbids and ma'amar is only rabbinic. It's clearly an issur kal. Hi asra alei dahai. Now, she is now prohibited to Levi because she can't marry any of the brothers once Shimon does ma'amar. She's specified to Shimon. That basically forbids the other brothers on a rabbinic level. Now, what if Levi anyway has relations with her? Asra alei dahai. She becomes prohibited to Shimon. So what do you see? Again, you see this case. What were the words? Issur kal ne'esar ha'osel. The one who forbade her, which was Shimon, now becomes forbidden, right? Because of what Levi did, she can't go back to Shimon. So what's the problem? Wait a minute. But it doesn't make sense that this is the case because, or this isn't a good example of a case where specifically having intercourse is what's going to create the problem. Why? Because in this, my area Shabala Sheni, Afilu Avibanami Mama. Even if Levi did ma'amar with Yael alone, that would prohibit her to Levi also. That would prohibit her to Shimon. Shimon did ma'amar with Yael and prohibit her to Levi. As soon as Levi does ma'amar with Yael, she becomes prohibited to Shimon as well. So that's not a good example. Okay, so now, and that is again, why is it not a good example? It's not a good example because we're looking for where specifically intercourse causes her to be forbidden to somebody else. And this is even Ma'amar would forbid. Well, halokasha, that's not such a problem because Rabban Gamliel, you could say like Rabban Gamliel, the Amal, ein Ma'amar char Ma'amal. The Ma'amar of the second one, according to Rabban Gamliel, is useless. It actually doesn't forbid her to Shimon. So that would be a good example. But comes the Gemara and says, Ela afilu natan laget, afilu chalatzla. No, but even if he just gives her a get, or he does chalitza to her, that if Levi does some sort of action with her that has something to do with yibum, chalitza, get, anything, that will already forbid her to Shimon as well. And then that would be a case where it wasn't intercourse that forbade it, and therefore it's not relevant for our purposes. Ela amar Rabbi Yochanan sota. Let's talk about a sota. So sota laman. Ilem alabal. Let's say she ended up sleeping with her husband. That's going to forbid her. Okay, the sota is only suspected she was with another man. So she doesn't really become forbidden to the boel until she drinks the sota waters, then it'll be clear that she was guilty. Or if the husband has relations with her, we learned this already, v'nikame avon, he has to be clear from iniquity. That means if he did something wrong, like for example, he's not allowed to sleep with her once he accuses her. So, if he sleeps with her, he then forbids her to the boel, to the one he suspected her, because she'll never end up drinking the sota waters, and that in of itself forbids her. Well, any situation where he basically precludes the sota ceremony from going through, she's going to be forbidden to the boel. So, right, the only case which should be permitted to him is if in the end she shows to be innocent. But if either she's guilty or you can't go through with the process, she'll be forbidden to the boel. So his having a relationship with her would cause that, but would be an issur kal, because it's only a lo taseh for him to sleep with his sota, right? His wife he accused of sota, because she's not an ish, he just accused her of sleeping with someone else. So, but that's not a good example because not just having intercourse with her that will forbid it, it could be any other action that will preclude the sota waters from going through, having the procedure go through. Ela sota liboel. What about sota for the boel? Okay, ha issur kal. Okay, so now what if we're just talking about a woman who sleeps with another man? So now that man, right, forbids her to someone else and also forbids her to himself. Remember, asur labal, asur laboel. Hi issur kalu, issur chamor. Wait a minute. That's an ish. That's a pretty strict issur. You can't say that. Dahainu ish. That's ish. Okay, so now, right? So again, if she sleeps with the boel, she's forbidden to her original husband. That would be a good example of like the sister, right? Sleeps with the sister, should forbid him back. And that's more kal. They say it's not more kal, it's ish. That's pretty strict. Moving now to amabet, ela amarava ish. Rav actually says, we're actually talking about a regular ish case. Rav said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, also ish. So now the big question is, how can you say ish is issur kal? Umay karele issur kal. She'ein ha'osra osra kol yama. Ish, when it comes to all the arayot, it's actually the least. Why? If it's, let's say, your father, right, father to a daughter, that's forever. You'll never not be his daughter. But ish could potentially not be an ish if she gets divorced, widowed, she's no longer an ish. So it's easy to get rid of it, as opposed to a sister, which she's always my sister. Right now, it could be I'll die, but that's already, more strict than just getting divorced. If I get divorced from my husband, he's still not allowed to marry my sister unless I'm no longer alive. Tanya Nami Hachi, here's a bright to support this reading. Abba Chanan Amal Mishum Rabbi Elazar Eshet Ish. Here he says exactly this. An Eshet Ish. Since it's an issur kal, why is it issur kal? It says it. She's not forbidden to him forever, right? To all the men in the world. And to the man who she ended up sleeping with, and yet the one who forbade her to marry anyone, which is her husband, she's now forbidden to him. So, habal issur chamol, like your sister's, right, your wife's sister, she'll be forever forbidden as long as the sister's alive. Right, the original wife is alive. Shouldn't the one who forbade him be forbidden as well? Talmud Lomar, Ota, that's why we need this drasha. Ota shlivata usarta ve'en shlivata chota usarta. Okay, this just explained the original brayta that we quoted in the beginning of today's talk, which explained why we need a drasha and what the logic of this logic that you could have concluded and what the issur kal was. Now, this wasn't confusing enough. We now are going to try to understand this confusing line of Rabbi Yosi in the Mishna that we read but really didn't explain. Okay, the simple reading of this is, there's no real simple reading, but anyone who disqualifies, causes others to be disqualified, he himself is disqualified. If he doesn't cause others to be disqualified, he won't disqualify others. So now, what does this mean? Rabbi Yosi. So let's pull up the presentation. So we have, again, we're going back to this case where Reuven was married to Leah and her sister Rachel was married to David, and David and Leah go off abroad. So we're left with Reuven and Rachel. They find out. Okay, Tanakama, if Rabbi Yosi is referring to Tanakama. Tanakama was talking about, we didn't see this inside, but we are assuming. Tanakama must have held. Leah and David go abroad. Eshet Giso Asira, right? It turns out then Reuven married her sister, and then it turns out Leah and David are alive. Reuven and Rachel were never really allowed to marry each other, and therefore, what do we say? So we end up saying Leah is permitted to Reuven, but Rachel is prohibited to David. Why is that? Because Rachel is a classic case of her husband went abroad. She thought he was right. She went based on one witness. She thinks that he's dead. She goes and marries. We penalize her. She can't go back and marry the person she was married to before, nor can she marry David. And Leah, though, is not in that case. She's in the case of the husband whose wife went off to Medina Hayam, and actually we permit that case. Right? Remember, we said the Yerushalmi had given the reason that it's a very uncommon case that the women travel. Maybe that's why. But the point is, Tanakama said, Eshet Giso Asira, Rachel is permitted to David, the wife of his brother-in-law, but issur sharia, but his wife is permitted. And then why don't we say that Ka'amar le Rabbi Yosi, what Rabbi Yosi is saying is, Gehechi issur sharia, Eshet Giso nami sharia. Maybe what he's coming to say is, when he says, right, if this is like this and this is like this, then what maybe he's saying like this. If Leah is going to be permitted to Reuven, then Rachel's going to be permitted to David. In other words, you got to keep it consistent. It's not fair to penalize one and not the other. So if we're not going to penalize one, don't penalize the other. So let's see what the problem with that is. Ihachi, it doesn't match the words. What it said there was anyone who doesn't disqualify others doesn't disqualify himself. This is the opposite. This is anyone who doesn't disqualify himself doesn't disqualify others, right? So it should have said, anyone who doesn't disqualify himself, doesn't disqualify others. It should have read that instead. Maybe we'll say it the opposite. Maybe we'll say, just like he forbids Rachel to David, because Reuven had been married to Rachel in the interim, right? He now prohibits her to David. Likewise, Leah will be permitted to him. Maybe that's what it means. Well, that works with one line of Rabbi Yosi, but it doesn't work with the other. Hatinach kol posel. That said, kol sheposel yidei acherim. Anyone who disqualifies others, posel yidei atzmo, disqualifies himself. But kol she'eno posel ma'avidate. But what's the leniency that he's saying? If he doesn't disqualify others, he doesn't disqualify himself. Well, that doesn't fit here either. So we're going to have two interpretations. Okay, we're going to have Rabbi Ami and we're going to have Rabbi Yitzchak Nafi. So Amar Rabbi Ami, Aresha. Rabbi Ami says this has to go all the way back to the first Mishna in our chapter. The first Mishna in our chapter distinguished between one witness and a Beit Din, right? Where the Beit Din determined by one witness she can marry, and two witnesses without a court. And remember, there were differences here. So now, Amar Rabbi Ami, Aresha. Niset al pi Beit Din. What did we say? Teitzei uptura min hakorban. She gets married by the court, she's exempt from the korban, but she has to get divorced from everybody. But if it was two witnesses, she's teitzei, but she has to marry, she is obligated in a sacrifice, right? And we even said, though, if it's al pi edim, she could even stay married to the original husband, right? She gets out of the second marriage, but the first marriage, she's still married to. But since she didn't have the court's involvement, she has to bring a korban. The Ka'amar Tanakama comes and says the following. Lo shna, now it doesn't say this in the Mishna, we're just assuming from Rabbi Yosi's reaction, this is what Tanakama said. Lo shna al pi edim, de eshet giso sharia. In other words, this case is going to be exactly the same. If there's witnesses, then eshet giso will be permitted, because again, we permit her to stay with her original husband. In other words, this case is no different from a regular case, because if there's court, then she's forbidden, right? If she went by the court and one witness, she's going to be forbidden to her original husband. So she's forbidden to him if there's court and one witness, she's permitted to him if there's two witnesses. The Ka'amale Rabbi Yosi comes and says, no. When it comes to the court, when there's a court in Eid Echad, since he causes her, okay, well now what he's saying is this. Eshet Giso, right, is going to depend on the situation. But whether Leah can be together with, I'll pull it up, okay, even though we don't have an exact chart on this, but whether Leah can be permitted to Reuven is going to depend on whether Rachel is permitted to David. So I'll be baiting to posel al yedei acherim, since Rachel's going to be prohibited, right? It's Reuven's relationship with her causes her to be prohibited to David. Posel al yedei atzmo, he's going to be forbidden to Leah as well. But I'll be aiding to aim posel al yedei acherim. But if there were witnesses that had said that David and Leah were dead, two witnesses, then Rachel's permitted to go back to David, and therefore eino posel al yedei atzmo. In that case, Leah will be permitted to Reuven. That's what Rabbi Yosi says according to the first interpretation, Rabbi Ami. Comes Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha and says, no, la'olam aseifa. What we're talking about is the second case. In other words, we're not going back to that first Mishna. But the difference is, he has two statements, right? Kol sheposel, posel, kol she'ena posel, eno posel. So which is which? One is talking about where Reuven was only betrothed to Leah, and one is talking about where Reuven was married to Leah. So now, the Ka'amar Tanakama. So first Tanakama comes in and says, Lo shna ishto v'giso v'lo shna usato v'giso. It makes no difference according to Tanakama. Eshet giso, right? So again, what happened? They went abroad, and then Reuven married Rachel, and then Leah comes back, and it turns out she's really betrothed to Reuven, and Rachel is still married to David. Okay, and their marriage wasn't allowed. So Tanakama says, Eshet giso asira. Sorry, B'kamar Tanakama lo shna ishto b'giso v'lo shna usato b'giso. We don't distinguish whether Reuven was married to Leah or Reuven was engaged to Leah. It doesn't make a difference. Again, we go back to Tanakama. This is Tanakama. Eshet giso asira ishto shar. Right, the wife of his brother-in-law is prohibited, but his wife is permitted. That's the classic Tanakama. The Ka'amar le Rabbi Yosi, but Rabbi Yosi comes and says, no, ishto v'giso delei kalamemar. When it comes to marriage, there's no picture of this, so I'll just say it outside. But when it comes to marriage, since it's clear to everybody that Leah and Reuven were married, which means that when Reuven married Rachel, there was no marriage. So Leah's allowed to go back to Reuven. That makes Rachel allowed to be with David. That's kol sheposel, eino posel yedei acher, eino posel yedei atzmo. In other words, he doesn't disqualify Rachel, he's also going to be permitted to his own wife. But people will say maybe Leah was only betrothed to Reuven upon condition, and maybe the condition was never met, which means that maybe Reuven was really married to Rachel. Now, again, if Reuven was never married to Rachel, then Rachel's not really forbidden to David. That's why in the first case, Rachel is forbidden to David, and that's why Leah could be permitted to Reuven. But in this case, basically it's going to be posel yedei acher. It could be he really was legitimate, fair and square married to Rachel, or people will at least think that. And therefore, she is prohibited. That's a case where we penalize her. She's prohibited to David, and therefore, af posel yedei atzmo, Leah is going to be prohibited to Reuven as well. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yosi. Comes Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel and is going to say, Yehuda says in the name, Shmuel halachat ke Rabbi Yosi, we pass like Rabbi Yosi. Matkefla Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi says, wait a minute. I got a problem if you're going to say that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yosi because there's something else Shmuel says. Does he really say that? There's a machloket, which we're going to explain in many different ways to try to resolve this question. Our question right now is according to the interpretation we just went by, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, okay? His understanding of Rabbi Yosi. So it says Yevamot. Rav amar harehi ke'eshet ish, u'Shmuel amar ina ke'eshet ish. This is a machloket that we don't really know what it means yet. A Yevamot is like a married woman, and she's, I guess, shomeret yavam, right? Waiting to get married. It's a yibum. She's like she's already married, and Shmuel says she's not really married. This is zika and all that. Is there zika? Is there not zika? But Amar Rav Huna, Rav Huna's interpretation of this machloket, we're going to see there's a bunch of interpretations, is like we see in the presentation. So Reuben, right, his brother, meaning we're talking about Shimon. Shimon's brother Reuben betrothed Yael and then went abroad. So Reuben goes abroad. Shimon hears his brother's dead. He marries he does Yibum, right? He marries her for the purposes of Yibum. Now, what happens? Remember, they were just betrothed. And then it turns out Reuben comes back on the scene. So Rav says, no, we saw before. We say basically, it was like she was married to Shimon, and she's forbidden to Reuven. Yabam is Reuven. Okay, the Yabam is, now Shimon's brother is Reuven. Okay, she was never fully married. She's not considered like a married woman to Shimon because she was already betrothed to Reuven, and Shariala, and she's therefore permitted to Reuven. Okay, so in other words, she's not an Eshadish. She's not an Eshadish to Shimon because she was really married to Reuven. Now, she's really married to Reuven. What do we see here? Even though it was Kiddushin, people might think it's Kiddushin al Tanai. Didn't we just explain that? Right? So again, okay, it doesn't say this in the Gemara, so I'll just explain it outside, which is according to Rabbi Yosi, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, what did we just say? And we said Shmuel Paskins like that if it was betrothal, it might be a betrothal al Tanai, and then she really was married to Shimon, and then she can't be married to Reuven. She can't be permitted to. So how did Shmuel say this? So Amar Abaye. First answer is, you're asking a question, assuming that when Shmuel Paskins like Rabbi Yosi, he's passing like Rabbi Yosi according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha's interpretation. That's not necessarily true. Dilma Rabbi Ami Kamar. Maybe he holds like Rabbi Ami, and he holds that that's not the reason why we paskin like him. So, okay, that's the first answer. That's only if you hold that, then you'll think that, but not if you hold like Rabbi Ami's interpretation. A totally different interpretation. Okay, I'm going to stop here. We'll get to this tomorrow. But also, if you're going to hold like Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, we still could come up with possible answers. Okay, and then we're going to have, like I said, a whole bunch of different answers to explain how Shmuel could, on the one hand, paskin like Rabbi Yosi, on the other hand, not use this issue of difference between Kiddushin and Isuin and saying that Kiddushin could have been on condition, which means maybe she really was married to the other person, which would then forbid her from going back to the original husband. And he doesn't say that, so it seems like there's a bit of an issue here. Okay, with that, we'll end for today. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everyone.